My family kicked me out of Christmas dinner, calling me a failure who'd never amount to anything. They didn't know that while they were carving turkey, I was commanding military operations across 3 continents. When my brother's commanding officer walked into that same dining room 6 months later and said, "Ma'am, General Rodriguez, it's an honor," my mother's face went white. The failure they'd disowned was now the youngest 4-star general in U.S. history, and my brother was under my command. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when my mother, Elena Rodriguez, answered the door wearing her best pearls and a smile that never reached her eyes. I'd just driven 18 hours straight from Fort Bragg, my dress uniform pressed and metal ribbons gleaming under the porch light. Christmas Eve in Tucson, Arizona, the one night of the year I thought my family might actually be proud of me. But let me tell you how a family can destroy everything you've worked for in a single night. How they can strip away your dignity and leave you questioning your worth, only to discover that while they were calling you a failure, you were actually making history. This is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment to commanding the very people who once looked down on me, and how the truth has a way of emerging when you least expect it. The Rodriguez family had built their reputation on 3 generations of academic excellence. My grandfather had been the first Mexican-American dean at the University of Arizona. My father was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon at Tucson Medical Center. My older brother Miguel had followed the family blueprint perfectly, valedictorian, full scholarship to Stanford, Harvard Law School, and now a successful prosecutor climbing the political ladder. I was supposed to be next in line, the daughter who would bring honor to the Rodriguez name through education and professional prestige. Instead, I'd chosen what they saw as the ultimate betrayal. While Miguel was accumulating law school accolades, I was crawling through mud at basic training. While he was making partner at a prestigious firm, I was leading soldiers through hostile territory in Afghanistan. For 8 years, I'd climbed the military ranks faster than anyone in my division, earning commendations for strategic brilliance and battlefield leadership that my commanding officers called unprecedented for someone my age. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I was coming home with news that would change everything. 3 days earlier, I'd received the call that would redefine my entire career. Defense Secretary Williams himself had delivered the message. I was being nominated for my 4th star, making me the youngest 4-star general in United States military history. At 32, I would be commanding 3 major theaters of operation and overseeing strategic initiatives that would shape global military policy for the next decade. The irony wasn't lost on me that Miguel, their golden boy, was currently serving as a military prosecutor under the chain of command that would soon include me at the very top. But I hadn't come home to gloat. I'd come home hoping that maybe, finally, they'd see that my path had value too. The Rodriguez house gleamed with Christmas decorations that looked like they'd been professionally arranged. Through the windows, I could see the familiar scene. My extended family gathered around the dining room table, my cousins sharing stories of medical school and law practices, my aunts praising their children's latest academic achievements. This was where I'd grown up feeling invisible, the daughter who preferred push-ups to poetry, who dreamed of serving her country instead of serving herself. My mother had made her disappointment clear from the beginning. "Mija, the military is where people go when they can't succeed in real professions," she'd said when I enlisted at 18. "You're throwing away your intelligence, your potential, your future." My father had been quieter, but equally disapproving, introducing me to colleagues as "our daughter who's in the service," with the same tone he might use to say, "our daughter who's in rehab." Miguel had been the cruelest. "Face it, Anna," he'd said during my last visit home 2 years ago. "You joined the army because you couldn't handle real competition. It's easier to play soldier than actually accomplish something meaningful." The words had stung because part of me wondered if he was right. Was I hiding in the military because I couldn't measure up to the Rodriguez standard of excellence? But standing on that porch Christmas Eve, wearing the uniform I'd earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice, I knew the truth. I hadn't run from excellence. I'd found it in the most demanding arena possible. What I didn't know was that this Christmas would be the last time I'd ever question my worth in their eyes. Miguel opened the door before I could knock, his expression cold as the December desert air. He looked me up and down with obvious disdain, his eyes lingering on my ribbons like they were costume jewelry. "Anna, you're late." Traffic was heavy coming through Phoenix, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I brought gifts for everyone." He didn't move aside to let me in. Instead, he crossed his arms and blocked the doorway. "We need to talk before you come inside. There's been a family meeting." My stomach dropped. Family meetings in the Rodriguez household were never good news, especially ones that happened without me. Through the open door, I could hear the familiar sounds of Christmas Eve. My cousins laughing, my aunts chattering in rapid Spanish, the clink of wine glasses and silverware. But Miguel's voice cut through it all like ice. "We've all discussed it, Anna. Dad, Mom, Tia Carmen, everyone. We're tired of pretending your choices don't affect this family's reputation." He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of a local news article. The headline read, "Military prosecutor Miguel Rodriguez leads high-profile court-martial." Below it was a photo of Miguel in his dress uniform, looking polished and professional. "This article came out last week," he continued. "It mentions our family, our legacy, our contributions to the community. And then, buried at the bottom, there's a line about my sister, who also serves in the military. Do you know how that makes us look? Like we couldn't even produce one child who chose a respectable career path." I stared at him, my mouth going dry. "Miguel, I'm about to be promoted to what? Another meaningless rank in an organization that wastes taxpayer money?" His voice grew louder, and I could see family members turning to look through the window. "You think playing dress-up and camouflage makes you important? You think following orders makes you a leader?" My father appeared behind Miguel, his face grave. Dr. Roberto Rodriguez had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. Tonight, his words felt like a verdict. "Mija, we've made a decision. This family has worked too hard to build our reputation, to have it damaged by association with whatever it is you think you're doing in the military." His voice was clinical, detached, the same tone he used to deliver bad news to patients' families. "Dad, if you'd just let me explain." "Explain what?" My mother appeared, flanked by my aunts. Elena Rodriguez looked resplendent in her red Christmas dress, every inch the surgeon's wife and community leader. "Explain how you've embarrassed us for 8 years? Explain how you turned down a full scholarship to pursue a dead-end career?" The accusations came rapid-fire now, a coordinated attack that felt rehearsed. My Aunt Carmen stepped forward, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Your cousin Maria just finished her medical residency. Your cousin Carlos is about to make partner at his law firm. And what do we say when people ask about Anna? That she's playing soldier somewhere." "I'm not playing soldier," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm serving my country. I've led missions that saved lives. I've received commendations for—" "For what?" Miguel interrupted. "For wasting your potential? Anyone can follow orders, Anna. It takes real intelligence to become a doctor, a lawyer, a professional." My mother pulled an envelope from her purse, thick and official-looking. "We've had our lawyer draft this letter. It formally requests that your military service not be mentioned in any future articles about our family. We're distancing ourselves from your choices." I took the letter with shaking hands. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. The Rodriguez family was publicly disowning my military career, treating it like a shameful secret. "You're ashamed of me," I whispered, the words falling like stones. "We're ashamed of your choices," my father corrected. "You had every advantage, every opportunity, and you threw it all away to play with guns and march around in formation." The sounds of Christmas dinner continued behind them, warm laughter, clinking glasses, the joy of family togetherness. But I was standing on the outside, in my dress uniform that suddenly felt like a costume, holding a letter that made me feel like a stranger. "Don't come back until you're ready to make something of yourself," Miguel said, and slowly closed the door. I stood there for a long moment, the Christmas lights blurring through my tears, still holding the gifts I'd brought for people who saw me as nothing more than a disappointment in uniform. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By New Year's Day, the story had spread through Tucson's elite circles like wildfire. Someone had leaked the family's disavowal letter to the Arizona Daily Star, and the headline made my stomach drop. Prominent Rodriguez family distances themselves from military daughter's career choices. The article painted me as the black sheep who had embarrassed a distinguished medical and legal dynasty by choosing, quote, a less prestigious path in the armed forces. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I couldn't bear to read. Former high school classmates, college acquaintances, family friends, all reaching out with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Saw the article about your family. Are you okay? What really happened at Christmas? Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of my reputation. The local military community wasn't immune to the gossip either. Within days, I started noticing subtle changes in how people treated me at the base. Conversations would stop when I walked into rooms. Officers who had previously shown me respect now avoided eye contact. The whispers followed me everywhere. That's the one whose own family is ashamed of her. If her own parents think she's a failure, what does that say about her leadership? My immediate superior, Colonel Martinez, called me into his office on a gray January morning. His face was carefully neutral, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. Rodriguez, I need to ask you directly. Is everything all right at home? There have been some concerning reports in the local media. He slid a copy of the newspaper across his desk. There was my military photo next to an editorial piece titled, When Family Values Clash with Military Service. Sir, with respect, my family's personal opinions don't affect my ability to serve, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I understand that, and your service record speaks for itself. But perception matters, especially at your level. The Pentagon is watching, and this kind of publicity raises questions about your judgment, your family's stability, your ability to represent the military in public forums. The message was clear. My family's public rejection of me was becoming a liability to my career. The very institution I dedicated my life to was starting to see me as damaged goods. Things got worse when Miguel's law firm issued a press release distancing themselves from any association with my military service. They felt compelled to clarify that the firm's values and Miguel Rodriguez's service as a military prosecutor should not be conflated with family members whose career choices may not reflect the same commitment to excellence. The betrayal cut deeper each time I read it. My own brother was using his position to publicly humiliate me, turning my service into a cautionary tale about making poor life choices. I found a small apartment off base, partly to escape the constant scrutiny and partly because I couldn't stand the sympathetic looks from fellow officers anymore. My neighbors were mostly civilians who didn't know my story, and for brief moments I could pretend to be just another person living a normal life. But the damage was spreading beyond Tucson. Military blogs and forums had picked up the story, debating whether family disapproval should impact an officer's career prospects. Some defended me, arguing that family dysfunction shouldn't matter if I was performing my duties effectively. Others questioned whether someone who couldn't maintain family relationships could be trusted with military leadership responsibilities. The cruelest blow came when I was passed over for a high-profile assignment I'd been expecting. The official reason was timing and personnel needs, but everyone knew the truth. No one wanted to deal with the controversy surrounding the rejected Rodriguez daughter. I spent evenings in my empty apartment, staring at the commendations and medals I'd earned, wondering if any of it mattered. My family had convinced the world that my military service was a failure, and slowly, insidiously, I was beginning to believe them. For weeks, I tried everything I could think of to rebuild my reputation and prove my worth. I submitted formal complaints to the base commander about the hostile work environment, documenting every snide comment and professional slight I'd endured since the newspaper article. I requested meetings with senior officers, hoping to demonstrate that my family's public rejection had no bearing on my military capabilities or dedication. Every door slammed shut in my face. Colonel Martinez listened politely to my concerns, but made it clear that the military couldn't control public perception or family dynamics. Rodriguez, your service record is exemplary, but leadership positions require more than just technical competence. They require the ability to maintain public confidence and unit morale. Right now, you're a distraction. I contacted military advocacy groups, thinking they might help me challenge what felt like discrimination based on my family situation. The legal officer I spoke with was sympathetic but blunt. Unless you can prove direct retaliation for a protected activity, there's no case here. Family disapproval isn't a protected class, and the military has broad discretion in assignment decisions. Desperate, I reached out to journalists, hoping someone would investigate the other side of the story. I wanted to tell them about my combat deployments, my innovative training programs, the soldiers whose lives I'd saved through quick thinking under fire. But every reporter I contacted had the same response. Family drama wasn't newsworthy unless there was scandal or illegality involved. The most crushing blow came when I applied for a prestigious assignment at the Pentagon that I was more than qualified for. The position would have fast-tracked my career and put me in direct contact with senior leadership who could see past the local gossip. I had the experience, the security clearance, and glowing recommendations from my previous commanding officers. I was rejected without even getting an interview. When I pressed for an explanation, I was told through back channels that, quote, "Current circumstances make this assignment inadvisable at this time." The translation was clear. My family's public humiliation of me had made me radioactive to anyone concerned about optics and political sensitivities. I started second-guessing every decision I'd made over the past 8 years. Late at night in my sparse apartment, I would pull out old photos from my deployments, images of me with my unit, receiving commendations, shaking hands with visiting officials. Had I been deluding myself about my accomplishments? Had I really just been playing dress-up, as Miguel had said? The doubt crept in slowly, insidiously. When fellow officers avoided me in the hallway, I wondered if they'd always seen through my facade. When I was excluded from informal leadership meetings, I questioned whether my previous invitations had been out of pity rather than respect. The confidence I'd built through years of successful service began to crumble under the weight of constant rejection and isolation. I even considered reaching out to my family, swallowing my pride and begging for reconciliation. Maybe if they issued a public statement supporting me, if they retracted their disavowal, I could salvage my career. I drafted emails to my mother, letters to my father, even text messages to Miguel. But each time, I deleted them before sending. The words they'd spoken on Christmas Eve echoed in my mind. Don't come back until you're ready to make something of yourself. The irony was bitter. I had made something of myself, more than they could possibly know, but their definition of success was so narrow that my achievements might as well have been invisible, and now their blindness was becoming everyone else's blindness too. My performance reviews remained strong, but the opportunities for advancement dried up completely. I was becoming what every ambitious officer feared most: competent but unremarkable, skilled but forgettable. By spring, I had resigned myself to the possibility that my family had been right all along. Maybe I had been fooling myself about my potential all these years. The breakthrough came on a scorching June afternoon when I least expected it. I was grabbing lunch at a small diner near the base, trying to blend into the civilian crowd where no one knew my story, when a young woman approached my table hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Colonel Rodriguez?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, immediately on guard. Another journalist? Another person who'd heard about the family drama and wanted to satisfy their curiosity? "Yes, but I'm not giving any interviews." "No, ma'am, you don't understand." She sat down across from me without invitation, her eyes bright with recognition. "I'm Sergeant Lisa Chen. You probably don't remember me, but you saved my life in Kandahar 3 years ago." The memory hit me like lightning. The convoy attack, the improvised explosive device, the chaos of gunfire and smoke. Lisa had been trapped under an overturned Humvee, bleeding heavily from a shrapnel wound to her leg. While other soldiers secured the perimeter, I had crawled under enemy fire to reach her, applied a tourniquet with my bare hands, and coordinated her evacuation under intense combat conditions. "I remember," I said softly. "You were screaming that you couldn't feel your leg. You told me that was normal with shock trauma, that the important thing was staying conscious and talking to you." Tears filled her eyes. "You made me recite my hometown, my family's names, my favorite movies, anything to keep me focused while the medics worked. The doctors said later that your quick thinking and that tourniquet saved my leg, probably my life." I stared at her, emotions I'd buried for months threatening to surface. "How did you find me here?" I've been stationed at Davis-Monthan for 6 months now. When I heard the rumors about about your family situation, I couldn't believe it. Ma'am, I've served under a lot of officers, but I've never seen leadership like yours. You didn't just give orders from a safe distance. You were right there with us, making life or death decisions under the worst possible conditions. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. Her wedding day, standing in her dress blues next to a man in a tuxedo. This is my husband, James. We got married last month. I'm walking down the aisle on 2 legs. Because of what you did in that convoy, my kids will have a mother who can run and play with them, because you risked your life for mine. The weight of her words crashed over me. For months, I'd been drowning in my family's narrative that my military service was meaningless, a waste of potential, a source of shame. But here was living proof that my choices had mattered in the most fundamental way possible. Ma'am, I don't know what your family said about your service, but I need you to know something. Lisa leaned forward, her voice intense. There are dozens of soldiers walking around today because of decisions you made under fire. Your leadership style wasn't just about following protocols. You made us better soldiers, better people. You taught us that real strength comes from protecting each other, not just following orders. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I brought this with me. It's a letter I wrote to my parents after that convoy attack, describing what happened. I never sent it because it felt too personal, but I kept it. I unfolded the letter with trembling hands. In Lisa's careful handwriting, I read, there was this colonel, Elena Rodriguez, who literally crawled through enemy fire to reach me. She stayed calm when everything was chaos, made decisions that saved lives, and never once made it about her own safety. If I ever have a daughter, I want her to be that brave, that decisive, that selfless. Colonel Rodriguez is what real leadership looks like. Sitting in that diner, reading those words, something fundamental shifted inside me. The doubt, the shame, the crushing weight of my family's rejection, none of it could stand against this simple truth. I had saved lives. I had led soldiers through impossible situations. I had made a difference that would ripple through generations. Thank you, I whispered to Lisa, though the words felt inadequate. No, ma'am, thank you, and whoever told you that your service doesn't matter, they're wrong, dead wrong. Lisa's words ignited something that had been dormant for months. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a legal pad and began writing down every soldier I could remember serving with, every mission I'd led, every life or death decision I'd made. For the first time since Christmas, I wasn't dwelling on my family's rejection. I was documenting my actual service record, the real impact I'd had on people's lives. I started making phone calls. Not to journalists or advocacy groups this time, but to the soldiers who had served under my command. The conversations were awkward at first. Many had heard the rumors about my family situation and weren't sure what to say. But when I shifted the focus to our shared experiences in combat zones, their voices changed completely. Corporal Jake Martinez, who'd served in my unit in Afghanistan, told me about the night patrol where I'd identified an IED before anyone else saw it, potentially saving the entire squad. Ma'am, you had this way of seeing things others missed. Not just tactical stuff, but reading people, understanding when something was off. You kept us alive more times than we could count. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez reminded me of the evacuation mission, where I'd coordinated with multiple air support units under heavy fire to extract wounded civilians. Colonel, you stayed on that radio for 6 hours straight, managing 3 different aircraft, 2 ground units, and a medical team. I've never seen anything like it. The Air Force pilots still talk about that operation. Each conversation revealed details I'd forgotten or minimized. These soldiers remembered specific moments where my decisions had changed outcomes, where my leadership had made the difference between success and failure, between life and death. They spoke about innovations I'd implemented in training protocols, tactical adjustments I'd made that had been adopted by other units, strategic recommendations that had influenced broader military policy. I began compiling documents that told a different story than the one my family had spread. Commendation letters from superior officers describing my, quote, exceptional leadership under extreme combat conditions. After-action reports that highlighted my, quote, innovative tactical thinking and decisive command presence. performance evaluations that consistently rated me in the top 5% of officers at my level. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. While searching through old files, I found a folder of letters that soldiers had written to their families about their deployment experiences. My former aide, Sergeant Thompson, had given me copies years ago, thinking I might want to see how my leadership was affecting the troops. Reading them now, I was stunned by what I found. Letter after letter described missions where my decisions had made the critical difference. Soldiers wrote about feeling confident and secure under my command, about learning leadership principles they carried into civilian life, about tactical training that had saved their lives in subsequent deployments. One letter from Private First Class David Kim to his parents particularly stood out. My commanding officer, Colonel Rodriguez, is different from what you see in movies. She doesn't yell or try to intimidate people. Instead, she teaches us to think for ourselves while working as a team. Yesterday, she spent 3 hours helping me understand a tactical concept I was struggling with. She said good leaders create more leaders, not just followers. I want to be that kind of leader someday. As I organized this evidence, a clearer picture emerged. My family saw the military as a place for people who couldn't succeed in real professions. But the reality was that I'd been operating at the highest levels of responsibility and decision-making, managing complex operations that affected national security and human lives. The skills I'd developed, strategic thinking, crisis management, leadership under pressure, were exactly what the business and professional world valued most. More importantly, I realized that my impact extended far beyond any individual achievement. I'd trained hundreds of soldiers who were now leaders themselves, implementing lessons they'd learned under my command. The strategic innovations I'd developed were being used by military units around the world. I wasn't just a successful officer. I was someone whose influence would be felt for decades to come. The breakthrough I'd been searching for came from the most unexpected place, my grandmother's attic. Abuela Carmen, my father's mother, had passed away 3 months after my Christmas exile. She'd been the only family member who'd ever expressed pride in my military service, though she'd done so quietly, away from the rest of the family's disapproving ears. Her house had been sitting empty while the family argued over the estate. When my cousin called to ask if I wanted to collect any personal items before they sold the property, I almost declined. But something drew me back to the small adobe house where I'd spent childhood summers listening to stories of my grandfather's service in World War II. In the dusty attic, behind boxes of old Christmas decorations and photo albums, I found a locked wooden chest I'd never seen before. The key was taped to the bottom in an envelope marked Para Ana in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Inside were documents that took my breath away. My grandmother had been quietly collecting evidence of my military achievements for years. She had newspaper clippings from military publications that mentioned my innovations in battlefield medicine. She'd saved copies of commendation letters that had been sent to my parents, letters they'd apparently thrown away without reading. But the most shocking discovery was a thick folder labeled Anna's Real Story. Inside were printed emails, letters, and documents that painted a completely different picture of how my family viewed my military service and how they'd deliberately hidden my achievements from their social circle. There was an email from my mother to her sister, dated just 2 months before my promotion to colonel. Roberto is furious that Anna's commanding officer called the house yesterday to congratulate us on her promotion. He made me promise never to mention it to anyone at the hospital. Can you imagine how it would look if people knew our daughter was outranking doctors' sons in the military? Another email, this one from Miguel to his law firm's managing partner, was even more damning. I need to request that my sister's military service not be mentioned in my biography for the partnership announcement. The family has decided that highlighting her achievements would detract from the academic and professional excellence we want to emphasize. But the most devastating find was a letter my father had written to the local newspaper editor, asking them to stop covering military promotions and achievements in their community section. He'd specifically requested that they, quote, avoid highlighting individuals whose career choices might send the wrong message to young people about the value of higher education. My grandmother had also saved copies of articles that my family had successfully buried. Stories about my leadership in combat zones, features about my innovative training methods, even a Pentagon newsletter that had highlighted my strategic contributions to Middle East operations. All of these achievements had been systematically hidden from anyone who might have celebrated them. At the bottom of the chest was a letter from my grandmother, written in her shaking handwriting just weeks before she died. "Mija, if you're reading this, then they've tried to erase you again. But I've been watching, I've been saving, and I know the truth. Your family is afraid of you, not because you've failed, but because you've succeeded beyond their understanding. They live in a small world where only certain kinds of achievement matter, but you've been changing the world in ways they can't even see. I saved everything they tried to throw away. Every letter from your commanders, every article about your service, every proof that you are extraordinary. Don't let them make you small, Anna. Don't let them convince you that their narrow vision is the only truth. You have been leading armies while they've been playing politics. You have been saving lives while they've been counting money. You have been serving something bigger than yourself while they've been serving only their own egos. The promotion is coming, Mija. I heard them talking. They don't know that I know, but it's coming. When it does, show them who you really are." I sat in that dusty attic, surrounded by the evidence of my grandmother's quiet rebellion, and finally understood the full scope of what had happened to me. My family hadn't just rejected my career choice. They'd actively worked to hide my success from the world. Armed with my grandmother's evidence, I began digging deeper into my family's systematic campaign to hide my achievements. What I discovered was more elaborate and deliberate than I could have imagined. They hadn't just been embarrassed by my military service. They'd been actively sabotaging my reputation to protect their own social standing. I reached out to former family friends and colleagues, asking casual questions about what they'd heard about my military career. The responses were telling. Dr. Patricia Williams, my mother's longtime colleague, admitted she'd always wondered why she never heard about my promotions or achievements. "Your mother would quickly change the subject whenever anyone asked about your service. We assumed you were struggling or had encountered some kind of problems." The pattern became clear. My family had created a narrative of my military service as something shameful that needed to be hidden. They'd never outright lied, but they'd used silence, deflection, and strategic omissions to create the impression that I was failing or underperforming. I contacted the Arizona Daily Star reporter who'd written the original article about my family's disavowal. James Morrison was surprised to hear from me, and even more surprised when I shared the evidence I'd found. "Colonel Rodriguez, I had no idea about your actual service record when I wrote that piece. Your family presented your military career as a disappointment, a deviation from their standards of success. They never mentioned any of these achievements." Morrison agreed to investigate further, and what he found was damning. He discovered that my father had been pressuring local media outlets for years to minimize coverage of military achievements, particularly those involving the Rodriguez family. Roberto had cultivated relationships with editors and publishers, using his position as a prominent surgeon to influence how military service was portrayed in local society pages. But the smoking gun came when Morrison obtained email records through a Freedom of Information Act request. Miguel had been corresponding with military public affairs officers, requesting that his family not be mentioned in press releases about my promotions and commendations. He'd claimed it was for security reasons, but the timing coincided perfectly with his own career advancement at the law firm. More shocking still was the discovery that my mother had been actively discouraging other military families from discussing their children's service achievements at social gatherings. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been quietly promoting the idea that military service was something families should downplay rather than celebrate, effectively creating a social environment where my achievements would be invisible, even if they were known. The most devastating revelation came from an unlikely source: Miguel's former law school roommate, now a military lawyer himself. Captain David Torres contacted me after hearing about Morrison's investigation. He revealed that Miguel had been privately disparaging my military service in professional circles for years, describing it as quote, 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 and in the military, quote, 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 handle real intellectual challenges. Your brother told people you were basically playing army while he was doing serious legal work, Torres said during our phone conversation. He made it sound like military service was for people who couldn't succeed in civilian careers. I never challenged him because I assumed he knew you better than I did, but now I realize he was just protecting his own reputation. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, my Aunt Carmen's personal assistant, who had overheard family conversations about, quote, managing the Anna situation. She revealed that the family had actually consulted with a public relations firm about how to minimize potential embarrassment from my military achievements. They'd been advised to, quote, redirect conversations toward family members with more traditional success markers. The pattern was unmistakable. My family hadn't just been disappointed by my choices, they'd been terrified that my success would expose the shallowness of their own values. They'd systematically worked to hide my achievements, because those achievements threatened their carefully constructed narrative about what success looked like. I realized that my grandmother's prediction had been right. The promotion was coming, and when it did, there would be no way for my family to hide the truth anymore. The question was, what would I do with the power that was about to be handed to me? The call came on a humid July morning while I was reviewing deployment schedules in my office. Defense Secretary Williams himself was on the line, his voice carrying the weight of history. Colonel Rodriguez, the President has approved your nomination for 4-star general. The Senate confirmation hearing is scheduled for next month, but I wanted you to be the first to know. You're about to become the youngest 4-star general in United States military history. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, then managed to respond. Thank you, sir. I am honored by the confidence you've shown in me. Anna, this isn't just about confidence. Your strategic innovations in combat medicine have been adopted across all branches of the military. Your leadership methodology is being taught at West Point. You've earned this. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family had been systematically hiding my achievements, the highest levels of the military had been watching and taking notice. The promotion I'd dreamed of but never dared expect was becoming reality. The news broke 3 days later. Major news outlets picked up the story immediately. 32-year-old Elena Rodriguez to become youngest 4-star general in U.S. history. The coverage was extensive, detailing my combat deployments, strategic innovations, and rapid rise through the ranks. For the first time, the public was seeing the full scope of my military achievements. My phone exploded with calls and messages. Former soldiers reached out to congratulate me. Military colleagues expressed their excitement and pride, but the calls I was most curious about never came. My family remained completely silent. The real moment of vindication came 2 weeks later, during my official confirmation ceremony at the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and hundreds of military officials gathered to witness my promotion. As I stood on that stage wearing my new 4-star insignia, I thought about Christmas Eve 8 months earlier when I'd been called a failure and a disappointment. But the universe had one more surprise in store. 3 hours after the ceremony, as I was celebrating with fellow officers at a reception, my aide approached with an urgent message. General Rodriguez, there's a situation at your family's home in Tucson. Miguel Rodriguez has requested an immediate meeting with you. He's with his commanding officer. The drive to Tucson felt surreal. I arrived at my childhood home in my dress uniform, the 4 stars gleaming on my shoulders, to find Miguel standing in the driveway with Colonel Patricia Hayes, his new commanding officer. Miguel looked pale and uncomfortable in his military dress uniform. Colonel Hayes stepped forward first, snapping to attention with a crisp salute. General Rodriguez, ma'am, it's an honor to meet you. I apologize for the unusual circumstances, but Captain Rodriguez requested this meeting urgently. Miguel's face was ashen as he realized the full implications of what was happening. His commanding officer, a woman he'd been trying to impress for months, was now standing at attention before his sister, the woman he'd called a failure just 8 months earlier. Through the front window, I could see my parents and extended family watching from the living room, the same room where they'd kicked me out on Christmas Eve. Their faces showed a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Ma'am, Colonel Hayes continued, Captain Rodriguez has been under my command for 6 months. I've been impressed with his legal work, but I have to say, he never mentioned that his sister was General Elena Rodriguez. When I saw the news coverage of your promotion, I realized we had a connection I wasn't aware of. Miguel finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Ana, we need to talk. As a family. I looked at him for a long moment, then at the house where I'd grown up feeling invisible and inadequate. The same house where they'd told me I'd never amount to anything. Captain Rodriguez, I said formally, I believe your family is expecting you for dinner. Colonel Hayes, thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. For the first time in my life, Miguel had no words. None of them did. Pravime. 6 months later, I stood in the Pentagon briefing room, addressing a joint session of military leaders from around the world. As the youngest 4-star general in U.S. history, I was presenting strategic innovations that would reshape modern military operations for decades to come. The same tactical thinking my family had dismissed as playing soldier was now being studied by military academies on 3 continents. The transformation hadn't just been professional, it had been personal. The woman who had once doubted her worth on a Christmas Eve doorstep was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength comes not from others' validation, but from knowing your own value and living it boldly. My family had eventually reached out, of course. It started with tentative texts from my mother, then awkward phone calls from my father, and finally a formal letter from Miguel requesting a meeting. They wanted to reconcile, to put the past behind us, and celebrate my achievements now that they were impossible to ignore. I met with them once, at a neutral restaurant in Tucson. They came prepared with apologies and explanations. My mother talked about how proud she was now, how she'd always known I was special. My father mentioned showing my Pentagon photo to his colleagues. Miguel claimed he'd always believed in me, but had been protecting the family from unwanted attention. I listened politely, then shared something they didn't expect. I'd established the Carmen Rodriguez Foundation for Military Families, named after my grandmother. The foundation provided support for military families dealing with judgment and misunderstanding from their communities. It funded scholarships for children of military personnel and created mentorship programs connecting young people with successful veterans. This is my real family now, I told them. The thousands of military families who understand what service means, who know that protecting others is the highest calling anyone can have. I didn't cut them off completely, but I didn't pretend that their sudden pride meant anything either. They'd revealed who they truly were when they thought I was powerless, and that knowledge had freed me from needing their approval. The greatest validation came from an unexpected source. Lisa Chen, the soldier whose life I'd saved in Kandahar, had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and was now serving under my command. During her first briefing to my staff, she told them about the convoy attack and how my leadership under fire had shaped her understanding of what military service truly meant. General Rodriguez doesn't just lead by example, she said. She leads by making everyone around her want to be better than they thought possible. That's not something you learn in textbooks. That's something you carry in your heart. My office walls now displayed photos from ceremonies around the world, commendations from heads of state, and letters from soldiers whose lives had been changed by programs I'd implemented. But the centerpiece was still my grandmother's letter, framed next to a photo of us together when I was 12, both of us in uniform, her in the traditional dress of her village in Mexico, me in my junior ROTC uniform. The Pentagon had become my new family home, filled with people who understood that service isn't about personal glory, but about something much larger than yourself. Every morning, I walked past the portraits of military leaders who had shaped history, knowing that someday my portrait would hang there too, not because of my family name or social connections, but because I had earned my place through dedication, sacrifice, and the courage to lead when others couldn't. The girl who had been kicked out of Christmas dinner had become the woman who now shaped military policy for the most powerful nation on earth. And the best part? I'd done it not by changing who I was, but by refusing to let anyone else define who I could become. My name is General Elena Rodriguez, and I am exactly who I was always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.